So, very, very instructive verse and purport here. And for me, the thing it's bringing out most is this sense of duty and the virtue of these people who lived in this age. Very, very virtuous. And there's many points of virtue being described here. And first off, we see how Kunti, she lived for the sake of her father's children. She didn't live, and Prabhupada mentions in the purport that once the husband died, she didn't think, she wasn't, yeah, she said, Kunti decided to live, not to enjoy life in the absence of a husband, but only to give protection to the children. So we see, like, if you sort of fast forward it to 2021, and we see that what will often happen is when the husband passes away, sometimes it's only a very, very short period of time before the woman either finds another partner or is in another relationship or gets married again. And the same with the husband, if their wife passes away or whatever, it doesn't take long before they're back in a relationship. So if you look at that, what's the difference? In the modern sort of concept, it's like it's all centered on the self. It's all centered on this self-enjoyment. How can I be happy? How can I enjoy myself in this world? But a life of duty, a life of virtue, means that you live your life for higher principles. You don't live it for your own satisfaction. You live it for the satisfaction of others. There's a really nice verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I've just forgotten the Bengali, but it mentions that. Talks about this concept of para upakar, how one who's actually an elevated person, they live their life for the welfare of others. Para upakar means the supreme welfare activity. So Prabhupada defines that the supreme welfare activity means you live your life for the benefit of others, meaning you give Krishna consciousness, even though it may be uncomfortable, even though it may be very difficult for us individually. Then we spend our hours, our time, our days, whatever it is, presenting Krishna consciousness in the best way we can for the benefit of others. And we see this is what's happening here, with Pandu, with Prita, and Vidura. You can see how, like Kunti, she didn't want to be on her own. I remember, like, my father died when I was 15, and so my mother raised the four boys. And for her it was very difficult, because we were quite strong-minded, the four of us, and especially my elder brother and I. And it was very difficult for her, we were constantly getting ourselves in all sorts of trouble, and she had to deal with that. So it was very difficult for the woman to be on her own, but and Kunti was in a similar position. She had five sons to raise, but not only did she have 5 sons, they were Kshatriyas, but not only were they Kshatriyas, they were actually the rulers of the world. Yudhisthira was destined to be the ruler of the world, so she had to ensure that Yudhisthira received all the proper education that was necessary for him to rule the world, because it's not like in this day and age, someone they just run for whatever, for office, and usually what happens is the person who can tell the best lies is the one who gets the position, because they tell all these things, they say all these things during the election campaign, but how many of them do they actually implement? And where's their training to take on that position? It's quite amazing, Like if you are to take on a position in say, for instance, you want to become a doctor, you have to be trained. If you want to become the head of a company, you have training. You go through years and years of training. What's the training the politicians get? There's no training that I'm aware of. They just might spend some years in Parliament. I mean, even like you look at the previous president they had in the USA, he wasn't even a politician. He was a businessman. What was his training to run a country? He had nothing. So previously we see that in the Vedic age that the kings would receive a lot of training. And this was the case with Yudhisthira. When they were living in the forest, they were living with the sages. And so that they had received, especially Yudhisthira had received a lot of training in the Vedas and the different texts, and also about Dharma, etc., from the sages. And they actually were very, very pious. They understood what were the proper ways to conduct their life. And then when Pandu died and Madri entered into the fire, which in itself is quite extraordinary. You can just imagine, like you burn, say for instance, you hold your hand over the ghee wick for too long, and you burn your finger, and it's quite painful. And it's distressing. Yet Madri voluntarily, when the sages, they built the funeral pyre, they put Pandu's body on the funeral pyre. They gave Yudhisthira the torch. Yudhisthira, as the eldest son, he lit the fire. And he was only a young man at the time. He wasn't like really an adult. He was quite young. He was a teenager. He lit the fire of his father. Very, very dutiful, And then Madri, she folded her palms. She walked into the fire and embraced her husband. Can you imagine doing something like that? Walking into a fire, knowing that you're going to be burnt to death. But so, this is kind of like, it really shows us the difference between our modern concepts and the concepts that were present in the Vedic age, especially in the previous Yuga. That even though it was very, very difficult for them to do these things, because of their devotion to their husband, they were willing to give up their life like that. It wasn't a thing, this is going to hurt. That wasn't the consideration. That never entered into it. But out of duty, they entered into the fire. But as Prabhupada points out here, is that this became somewhat corrupted, and you find that earlier on in the previous century, I guess not this century, in the previous century, in the 1900s, where it's kind of interesting, it's like this fanaticism, there's a rule, it has to be followed. They don't understand that the whole concept behind the rule, they don't understand the consciousness that needs to be there. But they used to take the widow and throw her into the fire, forcibly. Barbaric, completely barbaric. It has to be something that's voluntary. It has to be something that's done because, the woman's feeling she can't live without her husband. But this is not so prevalent in this day and age. It's quite rare. It happens, but it's quite rare you'll find something like that. Someone who's got that kind of consciousness. And it's the same with, all the practices we have in Krishna consciousness. Okay, we can, come to the temple and follow them. Sometimes you'll see folks, they'll come to the temple and they'll do all these rituals before the deities. And you ask them what it is they're doing, and they don't really understand. They have no idea. And you look in different faiths, there's so many rituals they're following. But if you ask them what's the meaning of the ritual, there's no idea. Prabhupada told a story about the cat in the basket. So, in short, like what happened was there was a cat, lady's daughter's getting married. She saw a cat, she thought it was inauspicious. She took the cat, she put it in a basket, put a lid on it, because she didn't want the cat to, bring about any inauspicity to the wedding. The daughter saw that. So years later, her daughter's getting married in a distant village. And she says, Mother, is there any special preparation I should make the wedding? And she says, no, nothing special, but one thing you need to do is you need to put a cat in a basket. And so she asked her mother, well, why should I do that? She said, no, I don't know, but my mother did it, so you should do it. So no understanding of why. If she had bothered to ask her mother, she would have realized that, mother thought it was inauspicious, to have a cat wandering around the place. So we see that many rituals are there in Krishna consciousness and also in other religious faiths where the practitioners, they just follow the ritual blindly. They don't understand. And Srila Prabhupada was very clear on that. He didn't want blind followers. He wanted us to understand what was the practice, why we do these things, what's the benefit of it. Because if you understand something properly, you understand the benefit of it, then you're going to do it with, enthusiastically because you're understanding, yes, I by doing this I'll get great benefit. But because we don't really either we don't study the philosophy deeply, we don't understand how the practices benefit us, we don't understand how the practice of Krishna consciousness help us to overcome the mind and the senses. I was just listening to a class this morning, Prabhupada was talking about Archan. So from the third canto, actually, from the 5th chapter. I think 5th chapter, maybe 10th chapter. And so Prabhupada was talking about how, by studying by following the Archan process, one becomes purified and actually becomes advanced in Krishna consciousness. So much so that one gives up all the material desire. And Srila Prabhupada, in his lectures, you listen to his lectures and read his books, you can see how he very clearly explained how these things work. It wasn't just sort of some mysticism or magic. Of course, Krishna himself is a very magical person, and when we come into contact with Krishna, miraculous things will happen, and sometimes very difficult to understand. But Prabhupada, and this is the point that Srila Prabhupada repeatedly made, that Krishna consciousness is a science. It's not some sort of mumbo-jumbo thing. If you do this, some magic's going to happen. It's a science. So science means, just like mathematics is a science, and we know that in mathematics, everywhere in the world, 1 + 1 = 2. It's a science. It's not like sometimes 1 + 1 is 3, or sometimes 1 + 1 is 1.5. No, it's always 2. That's what science means. It's like you apply the certain process, you'll get a particular result. So in Krishna consciousness, it's exactly the same. And previously, especially with persons like Bhishma, Yudhisthira, they understood the science very well. Vidura, they understood the science, the Vedic science of Krishna consciousness very, very well. And therefore they applied it. And so we see, as I was saying here, what happened was after Madri entered into the fire, then Yudhisthira, he approached the sages and he said, what should we do? And it's kind of interesting. It's not like, he goes to the sages and he says, what's your opinion on this? I'm trying to make up my mind what to do. And, like we do in this day and age, we go around, we ask, keep asking. We have something in mind we want to do, right? And we go around and ask all the sadhus until we find a sadhu who agrees with what I want to do. Oh, Maharaj said. We don't actually, accept, okay, you go and approach a sadhu says do this. We don't just accept and do it. We tend to kind of have our own preconceived ideas of what I think is best for me, and then I'll find someone who agrees with that, and then I'll follow them. But then if they say something I don't agree with, I'll go find someone else to follow. Very, very, very mercenary. It's like a prostitute, just goes from one to the next until they get what they want. And that's what we're like sometimes in this age. So Yudhisthira and Kunti, they approached the sages. I think the place was called 5 Pigs, but I don't remember the Sanskrit name for it, or the Vedic name for it. Anyway, so Yudhisthira and Kunti, they approached. They said, "Okay, what should we do now?" And the sages said, "You must see to the education." I think it's actually Kunti approached. You have to see to the education of the children. So you should go back to Hastinapur, take the children to Hastinapur so they can be trained to be Kshatriyas because they are the leaders of the world. And then when they went back there, because there was a whole group of sages and they saw these 5 effulgent youths, they didn't know who they were. And so Bhishma, I think Bhishma understood actually. Bhishma was very, very wise. Bhishma, Dhritarashtra, and all the seniors, they came out. Vidura, Drona, Kripa, they all came out of the city to greet them. And then at that point, the sages said, "These are the 5 sons of Pandu." And very, very handsome, effulgent, powerful-looking children. And they explained to them that these are the rightful heirs to the kingdom. So you have to train them to become, have to train them to be the emperors and the leaders of this thing. So the sages told them. Yet, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, they maintained, because they had been kind of like, in absence ruling, they maintained this attachment to the kingdom. And because they were impious, because they're irreligious, they plotted, especially Duryodhana plotted to do away with the Pandavas. And this enmity, as we know, this enmity arose between Duryodhana and Bhima. And they're always trying to kill Bhima. But by the arrangement of Krishna, they always came out victorious, successful. And so we see here that, the example is like, Kunti, she asked the sages, and even if the sages had have said something to her that was not agreeable to her, she would have done it. Why? Because they are the authorities. They are the ones who know. And the Kshatriyas were very, very dedicated to the Brahmanas. They would care for the Brahmanas. They'd worship the Brahmanas. They'd make sure the Brahmanas were well taken care of. They'd give charity to them. And whenever they wanted to know something, they'd approach the Brahmanas. And whatever advice the Brahmanas gave them, they would follow that. It wasn't like, as I was saying, it's not like they pick and choose. Well, no, I don't agree with that, Maharaj. I'm going to do my thing, No, they would just follow because they understood. Because, the Brahmana is one who knows Brahman. He understands what is the supreme absolute truth. And as it says, on tad Vishnu paramam param pashanti suradivi vichaksaratam tad vipaso jagavigun samsamita te Vishnu yat paramam param. It says, just as the wise and learned Brahmanas, they can actually see the spiritual abode. And they're able to reveal that abode to us. So, because one who's actually a Brahmin, okay, we get Brahmin Diksha, we have Brahmin threads, etc., but it doesn't mean we're Brahmins. Prabhupada would regularly say that initiation means to begin. So we get initiated we receive Pancharatri Gayatri Diksha. It doesn't mean at that point we've become Brahmins. It means we've begun the process of trying to become a Brahmana. And Srila Prabhupada, he makes this point regularly that this society of Krishna consciousness is to establish a class of Brahmanas. He said, we're not interested in the other, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. There's actually for Shudra there's no training, but for Kshatriya and Vaishya, that's beyond our scope. Our scope is to train Brahmins. And that's very, very important. It is that, to understand the Brahminical qualities, to understand the Brahminical duties, and to dedicate our lives to cultivating these things. And you see Brahmanas very principled, Brahmanas very dutiful, especially Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. They're very, you see in the Gita, for instance, when it describes the Vaishyas and Sudras, it talks about activities. When it describes the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, it talks about qualities. So this is how a Brahmana is known, this is how a Kshatriya is known, by their qualities, whereas a Sudra and a Vaishya are known by their activities. And so, even in Gita, we see how Krishna is pointing this out. So, the idea with us taking to Krishna consciousness is that we must try to develop these qualities, as we see that are being outlined here, these virtuous qualities. Of course, Kali Yuga, very, very difficult time, and it's not necessary that we'll be able to develop all these qualities, but we must try. We must try to become virtuous. We must try to live our life for the benefit of others. And of course, the background we've grown up with is very, very difficult, because we see in Kali Yuga that everyone's living their life simply for their own satisfaction. Sense gratification is the goal of life. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's that's the mantra for the age. Just eat as much as you can, drink as much as you can, get as drunk as a skunk. In a big city like this, I live out in the country, you just don't see it. But when you come to even when you go into Moorlambar, you come to these big cities, you see, like in London, I know, like when I'm in London, when we walk home from the temple back to Murli Manohar Prabhu's place, and where I stay, then you have to walk past several pubs, and then 5 o'clock, from 5 o'clock till I don't know what time, but from 5 o'clock onwards, there's just all these people out there just talking really loud and drinking lots of alcohol and just getting drunk. And that's their whole focus, is to enjoy themselves as much as they can. And if someone impedes their enjoyment, that person's their enemy. It's a very different culture. It's a very different set of values from what is being spoken about here. And what's being spoken about here is this life of virtue, this life of duty. Kunti wanted to enter into the fire with Pandu, and as the senior wife, that was her right, was to do that. But Madri, she requested Kunti, and as Prabhupada points out, also Vyasadeva requested Kunti, no, you stay and look after the children. So she did it, even though it wasn't what she personally wanted to do, but out of duty she did it. And we see, like you look at the example of Prabhupada. What did he, he had a perfect situation. He was living in Radha Damodar temple, right near the samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada says that's the center of the spiritual world, and he was living there. And yet, he came to the West because his Guru Maharaj told him, that you preach in the English language. So he came to the West. He gave up a very comfortable situation, and then he comes to America, and Srila Prabhupada was somewhat revered as a sadhu in India. Yet when he came to the US, he was standing in line with the young men to use the bathroom. He was cooking for them. He was serving them meals, and he was also washing the pots and the plates afterwards, just to try to spread Krishna consciousness. He went through so many difficulties just to fulfill the instruction of his Guru. And this is, what's this example given by Prabhupada, the example given here in the Shastra. This is what's required of us also, is that we develop this sense of duty. And this is actually mode of goodness. This, the idea of being dutiful, that's a mode of goodness consciousness. Whereas you'll see like those in the mode of passion and ignorance. Passion just generally tends towards sense gratification. And ignorance just tends towards madness and sleep. So we see that, this life of duty. This is actually, the life of Krishna consciousness is a life of duty. Duty to others, duty to Krishna, etc. Okay, there's a lot more that could be said here, but we have a time limit, so. Any questions, comments at all? Old-fashioned. People just don't do things like that anymore. Huh? Sorry? Yeah, because as I was saying, the idea of duty, doing things out of duty, this is sattva, this is mode of goodness. And the thing is, like, when you put yourself first, just look at it, like, logically, when you put yourself first, right, then, and you don't achieve what you want, what happens? Huh? You suffer, you become distressed. Why did this happen to me? Why didn't I get what I wanted? And you just look around this whole city. What's going on? They're all suffering. They're all distressed. Why didn't I get this? Why didn't that happen? Why did this person cut me off in the traffic? Toot the horn. You hear so many people frustration. You see it, all the time here. There's so much frustration. Yet, if you're living a dutiful life, and you do your best to carry out your duty, and something doesn't happen, what do? How do you feel? How do you react? Huh? Yeah, you just say, well, I did my best. I did my duty, and it's in Krishna's hands. So just that simple example, you can see how detached you become from the modes of material nature. And by practicing the process of bhakti, by dutifully practicing the process of bhakti, even though it may take us quite some time to overcome our various anarthas and material desires, etc., out of duty, if we do it, well then patiently we process, and we know that we'll achieve the goal. It's just, you just do things, the Guru gives us the instruction, and just out of duty we follow the instruction because we know it's pleasing to Guru, pleasing to Krishna, and ultimately it will help me to overcome my material designation. So just if we act out of duty, then we know that in due course of time, that I'll receive the full benefit of that activity. It may not happen immediately because that's just the nature of it. It may take quite some time, but we just act out of duty and we're peaceful with that. Is that okay? It's not something that, like, it's just not something that's spoken about so much. I mean, in the military, it's there, and you see, like, in the military, the training they give them, the soldiers, is they have the sergeants or whatever barking orders at them day in, day out. Especially when they have these crack military troops, these very, very skilled or very expert troops. The training they put them through is very rigorous, and I know, like, in Australia they have I think they call them the SAS or something like that, what do they call them, the commandos, the special forces and stuff, like special air service, stuff like that. They put them through such rigorous training that the fallout rate is something like 98%. But like for those ones who make it, they're really well trained, and then, like, that they get to the point where, like, if the commander gives them an order, they just do it because they know that it's necessary for us to do this in order to achieve success. We have to function as a unit. We have to whatever the training is they give it for a purpose. And it's very, very rigorous. So in the same way, sometimes I remember there was these songs the Gurukul kids used to sing about Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan army comes marching over the hill, ki jai, So it's like that. It's a little bit like military training in some ways. Of course, it's not the same, but it's a little bit like that. But the whole idea is we're training ourselves to become fixed in Krishna consciousness, become fixed in our duty. And by becoming fixed in our duty to serve the Lord, to also, take care of the welfare of others, instead of just the welfare of myself, then we're actually able to overcome the effect of the material nature. So it's all got this purpose of giving Krishna consciousness to others, but also becoming Krishna conscious ourselves. Whereas you look out externally, it's all just about, how much I can enjoy. How can I satisfy myself? And if someone else gets in the way of my satisfaction, they become my enemy. And you see, the whole world's like that. They're just fighting over the same sort of, scraps. Like dogs fighting over scraps, Okay. 8:30. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Ko Premanandi. Hare Krishna.